Good morning, friends. Hello. Hey, good morning, John. How are you, friends? Kristen, good morning to you. Hope you're doing well. Hey, good morning, Linda. Donna, how are you? Good to see you. Hey, Rudy and Debbie, so good to see you here. I hope you are well. Nice seeing you guys. It's great. Great to see you. Good morning, Amanda. Sorry, no song today, Amanda. I'm sorry. How are you, friends? Good morning to you. Great to see you. So glad you're here today. It is a great day. So we will. I take away. Trying to fight off my. Oh, I hope you feel better, Donna. Yes. Yesterday's specialist. Yes. I hope that's true. I hope you feel better, Donna. Good morning, everybody. It is the 26th day of August at 11:11, and I am so glad that you're with us and a part of this journey. I want to start out today by marking the fact that it's a special day. 101 years ago today. Good morning, Priscilla. Glad you're here. Sherry, glad you're making it. 101 years ago today, the 19th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States was ratified, and it is the right for women to vote. It's 101 years ago. There are people alive today, there are women alive today who, when born into this nation, did not have the right to cast a ballot for an elected official. That is a reality in which we still live. This and I want to to visit this today, and I want to visit it through the lens of the prophet Amos. So Amos is an interesting guy. So we'll come back to the 19th Amendment here in a sec, and hear some of that story. But I want you to just hear. So Amos is a prophet. He's one of what are called the minor prophets. There's about a dozen prophets. The books are short towards the end of what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, and that are speaking to particularly around the year King Uzziah lived, or the reign of Uzziah or Jeroboam II, these kings that were around, who were particularly problematic. We also had kings 101 years ago by the name of Woodrow Wilson, who was particularly problematic. And this was these were the Lord's words through Amos to Israel and to the kings of that day. So, because Amos is an interesting guy, because he doesn't come. So, back in the day, there was this thing called the School of Prophets, and you kind of were a part of the school of prophets that you came up through. You learned how to be a prophet. That might sound a little odd to us today, but it was that to be an Old Testament prophet, there was a school you went to. You learned how to do these things, to hear the word of God, and to bring it to the people, and to bring it to the king, and as a way of knowing wisdom and guidance. And yet, Amos didn't go to school. Like, he makes it very clear. His father wasn't a prophet. He's not as from the lineage of prophets. He is this rogue voice out there. But hear what he has to say. He says, "Woe to you who long for the day of the Lord. Why do you long for the day of the Lord? That day will be darkness, not light. It will be as though a man fled from a lion, only to meet a bear. As though he entered his house and rested his hand on the wall, only to have a snake bite him. Will not the day of the Lord be darkness, not light, pitch dark without a ray of brightness? I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me." This is the Lord speaking. "Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. But let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-failing stream." Oh, so good. Righteousness like a never-failing stream. Oh, good morning. Good morning, Vicky. Good morning, Audrey. Hey, Fannie Faye Davis. That's the 1111 school. Oh, very funny. Yeah. Well, we find ourselves on the 26th day of August, and this 101 anniversary of the right for women to vote in our nation, to bring their voice to bear. Recognizing that the struggles of what actually came for that to come to pass. So the Susan B. Anthony bill, which was the amendment that was finally adopted, was brought to the Congress of the United States in 1878. That's right, 1878. Well, it was 101 years ago. There's a little time between there. There's actually nearly 40 years from the time that Susan B. Anthony and her compatriots, after the American Civil War, brought and gathered steam to submit to the legislature of the United States the right for women to vote. It took nearly 40 years. And it was 40 years of waiting, largely, of bringing the bill every year, of ensuring that it was put forward and having it sloughed off into committee or ignored. But it had sat in the State House. Think about this, for 40 years. The denial of the vote for women came to pass. Finally, a group of women had had enough, and they decided that it was time to force the issue. It was no longer time to be nice. After 2 generations of women had come and had been born into the world, and still nothing had moved. They began by this by deciding that they were going to, during Woodrow Wilson's presidency, force this issue. And they began by standing outside the White House as they took up residence at this place called the Cameron House, which is right across the street. It's a very nice place. And these women, by the way, were not just any old, they were not simply people who were, but these were women of stature, women of note, women that had educations, and that's not to say they were better than other women, but it's to say that they were very difficult to dismiss because of the powerhouses that they were. And so a dozen of them began every morning, rain or shine, and in 1917, coming from Cameron House, setting up in the morning with their banner. And they would stand out in front of the White House and the gate that the president would come through every day with their banner. And their banner read simply this: Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? Every day they were there, good weather or bad weather. They silently stood for weeks and through the severest winter. Now, if you remember correctly, the outbreak of World War I took place here, and so there was a great debate about whether they should suspend their work during the war or not, and they decided not. They said they needed to fight on. And so what began to happen is that the picketers that were out there with their sign that said, Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? They began to be hated because young men were being drafted and sent to war and dying, and they found this insistence, this nuisance of women's insistence for liberty, insistence for justice, insistence for the good to come, downright treasonous. And public anger began to turn against them, and which Wilson was more than happy to stoke. And the hostile crowd they would come by and they'd rip down the banner, and they would throw things at the women that were there. And then finally the police were called, and they were jailed and taken off to jail. These are women not accustomed to being in jail, but they were some of the very highest of status in the country, and this was quite scandalous and not as things were supposed to be. They ended up, by October of 1917, they were hauled off the picket lines and were placed in jail, and a few of the women began to refuse to eat. They decided that it was only by a hunger strike that they could actually still have their voice heard. So after 2 weeks of solitary, they're going without exercise. Their numbers began to diminish. There were only 7 of them left, and they began to get weak, and Some of them got sick, dizziness and fever. And yet they could not, and the press was horrible on the administration. They, no matter what these women may have done by bringing their voice, this notion that they might that they might die in prison, these women of bearing and of birth might actually find themselves prisoners of the state and dead. And as they were dangerously weak, the order was given that they should be force-fed. 3 times a day for 14 days, Alice Paul and Rose Winslow went through torture and forcible feeding. There was a rubber tube that was stuffed down their throat, and that beyond their esophagus and ability to swallow, and through that was poured the purees of food to keep them alive. Their eyes streamed with tears, their throats burned. As one person says, one wonders how the people of this nation, already tasting blood, can let this be done. One wonders. They finally found themselves in front of a sympathetic judge who would release them and allow after 5 weeks of living death, they would emerge, and they would emerge with the voice of justice and the voice on their lips that would then go to the Court of Appeals. And on January 10th, 40 years exactly, so the day that was introduced in 1878, the amendment was passed by the House of Representatives. It would take another 2 years before it would be passed by the Senate and be ratified, and more jailings would happen, more arrests would take place. But with the end of the war, the ultimate victory would come on this day 101 years later. On August 26, 1920, the Anthony Amendment finally took effect. And the 19th Amendment of the United States Constitution, for whom many lived and for whom some died in the climactic battle for the right of women to vote. A little half-starved band of ladies that would come to force a government and to force a people to let justice roll. You see, in the Amos text, what we find in there is we find that it says that these words from the Lord that Amos brings to the people. He says, I hate and I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Now, that doesn't mean a lot to us right now, but in the Old Testament context, that is huge. It is a huge deal, because the way Israel, before there was even an Israel, the way Israel had always gotten right with God is that they would end up making sacrifices. They would have religious festivals. It was, in fact, the religious festivals that kept them in right relationship with God. That was their whole function, was to keep the people oriented towards God and to keep the God oriented towards the people, to help to constantly work this relationship of penitence and of work and assembly towards the divine. That was the whole function of these religious festivals. And this moment where God says your sacrifices are no longer sweet. Your assemblies are a stench to me. This is a radical game changer. This changes everything in the biblical narrative. Now, there's other places this shows up. It shows up in Isaiah. It shows up in a few other places. But it's all; these are all, by the way, taking place about the same time. There's this radical shift in the way in which the people of Israel relate to the God of Israel. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. But, and this is the word, let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never falling stream. The people of Israel had lost their taste for justice. They had lost their desire to be in right relationship with each other and with their neighbors and with God. And then when the relationship was broken, there was no amount of work to put it back together again. There was no amount of doing all the right things. There was no amount of wars to be fought overseas. There was no amount of force feeding that could take place. There was no amount of work that you could do to make everything okay. But it was justice and only justice that would restore the life of the people and of God together. You see, I don't think the whole difference, I don't think it's so different in these days either. I think when we look at the long line, now this was 750 whatever years, 730 years prior to Christ we're talking about in Amos. We're talking about the suffragette women of 101 years ago who suffered and torture and death to bring about the vote for women on this day. And you see the promise is this, is that God's justice, the rightness and goodness of the world, the things being more right, continues to look more and more like that last chapter of the Bible in Revelation 22, where we bear witness to the New Jerusalem, the holy city, descending out of heaven like a bride adorned for her husband, coming to the earth. Let justice flow, because it is. Let righteousness come, because that is the long line and the grand gift of God's love for us and for all peoples. We can look back at any age and look at the barbarism of that age. We can look at our own age and look to the cruelty of it. But the long line of justice, the long arc of history, bends towards that which is right and good and true. It's kind of been the theme for this week, but I want you to hear it today, that those women who had tubes shoved down their throat, those women who had rocks thrown at them, those women who froze on the picket line, those women who were insulted, and those women who were killed in the pursuit of the right for justice, for just that things might be right, that liberty might come to this world a little bit more. Friends, I know each one of us are are feeling like we are in that Amos place to some degree or another, where we look to the world, we look to Afghanistan, we look to the news, we look to the people around us, we look to the anxiety, we look to the fear, and we find nothing that's sweet. There's no way to work our way out of this. It seems like there's no place that if we just work a little harder, if we just try and repair things, it'll be all better. It doesn't seem that way. It seems like we are at the mercy of forces that are beyond us. And yet I would submit to you, we are at the mercy of forces that are beyond us. But those forces, the Lord's divine providence, which is slowly and constantly and ever working towards leading and guiding you and me, but also guiding all of humanity through our glad states, through our happy states, through our scary states, through our times of sadness and of grief, through our loss and through our struggles, all of it. We may not understand, we may not see it, but all of it is bringing us a little closer to the heaven of eternity, the place in which your Father in heaven has set for you to know grace and love and peace and the true homecoming of every pilgrim on the path. Friends, it's a big day. We should speak of this day of where liberty had a victory. But we should also know that even in our workings and even in our efforting and even in all that we are doing, that the greatest thing is that we might let justice roll like a river, that we might let righteousness like a never failing stream wash over us and over each other, and know that God's ever with us, pointing us towards the eternal and bringing heaven a little closer. That kingdom of heaven that Jesus so often spoke about, a little closer to you and me. And that today is one of those days that we get to see a bit of the high water mark of that river rolling of justice. All right, friends, that's my hope for you today. I hope you have a great weekend. We will be worshiping at 9 o'clock right here at 282 Rock Street. We've been having some technical issues. I know we're doing our very best to bring you the service and that you can participate with us on Sundays. We're fighting through all the technical challenges we can. But if you can't join us live, please do join us on Facebook Live. We will endeavor to persevere that we might be able to worship together there as well. In all of this, my hope is that you have a beautiful and wonderful and justice-filled day, that it may roll, that all the good and the right and the true and the beautiful may roll over your life. Peace and grace, my friends. We'll pick it up with next week on next Tuesday with another 11:11.